Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a minute, but thank you very much for coming along early to our webinar today. We'd love to let us know where you're dialing in from today. If you could let us know in the chat, that would be great. And we'll get started in just a minute on how to ensure radical DevOps quality in your Salesforce org. Where are you dialing in from today, Andrew?
I am dialing in from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm not exactly a Las Vegas kind of guy, but there's a lot of conferences here. So I'm currently at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, which is my favorite DevOps conference of the year, aside from the AutoRABIT DevOps conference that'll be happening in April.
Nice. Very cool. Well, thank you for making the time.
Great pleasure. Nice to be back with you, Ben.
Yeah, you too. Cool. Okay, I think our attendees are leveling out, so let's get started. Thank you very much for dialing in with us today. We'd love to know where you're dialing in from in the chat. And today we're going to be speaking about how to ensure radical DevOps quality in your Salesforce org with Salesforce Ben and AutoRABIT collaboration. So DevOps has obviously been around for Salesforce DevOps has obviously been around for a few years now. You know, I think everyone's fairly familiar about what it does and the benefits it can bring to implement into your org. But it's a lot more than just implementing a product and having all your issues solved. There's processes to deal with, there's people to deal with. So today we're going to be taught by the master of Salesforce DevOps, Andrew Davis, and we're going to learn about how to be more lean and how to ensure radical DevOps quality in your Salesforce org. So let's get started, Andrew. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So everyone is muted because this is a webinar. But if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A box throughout the webinar. We have just noticed the chat's disabled. Sorry about that. We'll try and get that fixed. But please do drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get around to as many as we can at the end. And this will also be recorded and sent out as well. So if you need to drop off early, you want to send it to a colleague, then feel free. To introduce myself, my name is Ben McCarthy. I'm founder of SalesforceBen.com. I've got around 10 years experience a bit over 10 years experience in the Salesforce ecosystem now. And I'm joined by Andrew Davis.
Thanks so much, Ben. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AutoRABIT, just as of the last couple of months. Also, the author of the book Mastering Salesforce. So I've been almost the entire time that I've been focused on Salesforce, it's full-time. It's been focused on DevOps for Salesforce. So it's maybe about 9 years of experience just on this topic. So what I wanted to go into is summarizing these 3 points, just kind of reframing the challenge that we're all facing as Salesforce developers and admins and people in and around those teams. What are the challenges we're facing? And then this webinar is entitled Radical Quality, how to enable radical quality. So that's going to require a little bit reframing what quality really is. And then, as Ben indicated, we're going to go into principles of lean, because DevOps is really an extension of the broader lean movement that has had such a transformative effect on manufacturing, healthcare, and other industries over the last few decades. So first of all, summarizing a little bit about the challenge we face to help us to all understand what, reframe the work that we're doing. So from one point of view, what we're doing is we're trying to support a whole lot of users on Salesforce with a small number of super busy admins and developers. And hopefully that's not too much of a oversimplification, but basically you've got Salesforce as the platform that we're trying to customize and make work for our organizations. We're trying to support as many users as we can, both inside our organization. Maybe you're also building communities for partners and customers and so forth. And I took the liberty of extending the awesome admin superhero motif to include also the developers, because in general, everybody who's involved in these Salesforce projects, they're all often doing quite a lot of heroic work. And that really is the part that I want to dig into a little bit. What is the heroic work we're doing? but why is it taking so much heroism? So in general, one of the things you might notice from this very, very simple illustration is there's a lot more users than there are admins and developers. And I did some research a few years back that showed it was about a 300-to-1 ratio, 300 users per one full-time admin developer-y kind of person. So if you have 3,000 users, it's typical you'll have a team of maybe 10 admins and developers supporting it. 300,000, I'm not sure that anybody's got 1,000 Salesforce admins and developers, but on average, you're greatly outnumbered. The users greatly outnumber the admins and the developers. And that's great. And that means that the admins and developers have a lot of leverage. They're trying to support a lot of users with a small number of people. This is designed to enable that. But there's often a lot of pressure to scale. And the more demand there is for Salesforce services and so forth, the more users there are, the more pressure there is to scale up the development team. But how do we attempt to scale? I would say that there's generally three things we do most commonly to attempt to scale up the capacity of the admin and developer team. One is stay busy. And I think this is kind of the the cardinal rule in the world of work. There's this expression, hey, the boss is coming, look busy. And so there is, I think we've all internalized to some degree the idea that we should be busy or appearing to be busy all of the time. And that as long as we show up for work more or less on time, keep doing something all day, so to speak. And I don't know if how much this has changed with the pandemic, where we can all hide sort of being off camera and out of away from in-person interaction. But as long as it feels like we've been busy all day, it kind of feels like we've done what we're supposed to do. And I really want to question that assumption and dig into that in this webinar. So we have a very strong assumption we're supposed to just stay maximally busy all the time. We're going to look at that a little bit more. The second is work harder within the time that we're here, within the time that we're working. We want to work as hard as we can, and that's great. We should be working hard. We're in business. We should be busy to some degree, but we need to be cautious about some of these things and then hire more people, right? More responsibilities, just hire another person, hire another dev, hire another admin, hire a tester, hire somebody else, right? So these, I would say, are the three most common approaches to scaling. And then, of course, there's trying to improve better planning and these kinds of things. But I'll dig into these three in particular and question them a little bit, because I think there are some significant consequences to these. So if we're staying busy all the time, I would say that there's a risk that leads to long wait times, by which I mean, let's say Ben and I are working together and Ben is just totally flat out busy all the time and I'm totally flat out busy all the time. That looks great, doesn't it? Right? They're certainly getting their money's worth out of me. They're getting their money's worth out of Ben. We're all just working. But let's say Ben needs something from me and I'm already busy, right? So I can't do the thing that Ben needs me to do right away. That's going to have to wait. And what that means is that Ben may have to wait for me. And what could have been a quick, simple activity may require him to wait for hours, days, weeks, and so forth. So I'll get into each of these a little bit in more detail. But anyway, staying busy can lead to long wait times. Working harder can lead to poor decision making. I'll get into each of these. And then hiring more people can lead into these coordination costs, these hidden and dangerous coordination costs. So when everybody stays busy all the time, you get something that is that can look like this. This is a graph. On the horizontal axis is utilization, resource utilization. Now, this can be servers and how much the servers are utilized. 95% efficiency. Resource. CPU usage. These days, in the Salesforce world, you're not dealing directly with servers, but the same principles apply. Or it can be human resource utilization. So am I 100% busy, 95% busy, 80% busy? But look at what happens to this graph. So this the vertical axis is imagine the amount of work that you can put through a system. And this is, you can see the mathematical details of this site called Observable HQ. They're from a guy named Troy McGinnis, who does a lot of really good visualization, data visualizations on software development. But if Ben and I are both 70% busy or 80% busy, that means we have spare capacity. We have slack capacity, which means if he needs something from me, I can pick it up because I've got 10, 20, 30% capacity that I can pick up jobs that are incoming and I can support other people on the team. But people get to 85%, 90%, 98% busy. This follows a mathematical law called Kingsman's formula, that basically says the overall wait time, stuff piles up. So if you're in an organization where it takes you days, weeks, months to get things done, because it's got to go from this person to this person to this person to this person, that's actually screwed up. I know it kind of feels normal if you've worked in big organizations for a long time, but it happens because of this kind of stuff, because of not designing a work system that's optimized for actual throughput of work. So even relatively small organizations can get into this challenge where it can end up taking a huge long time to get things done because everybody is too busy. They're so busy that nobody can get anything done. It is the equivalent of a traffic jam. Now, I'm going to go into the second point here, and I'm going to go basically through similar points from multiple angles. Now, so I said the first thing that people try to do to scale their capacity is to stay busy. The second is to work harder. Now, of course, we should be working hard, but there are psychological problems that come from working too hard if we get overtired. And the one that I wanted to introduce here is the concept of decision fatigue, which means that every decision we have to make actually takes a bit of mental energy. And the higher and as you can see here, this graph is indicating that the higher the quantity of decisions that we have to make, then the lower the quality of the decisions that we have to make. And remember Jeff Bezos describing how he thinks about his work. He says, my role is a decision-making role. I try to make one good decision every day. That's his goal. Jeff Bezos' goal is to make one good decision every day. Now, the only way you can optimize your life to make one good decision every day, I'm not saying we're all in this situation or that our decisions have as much impact or consequence as his do. But the only way you can do that is to not have to load your mind up with thousands of different decisions. And so you've got a lot of quite famous people who wear the same clothes to work every day. Like Einstein was the one that I first heard, doing this. He just wore the same clothes to work every day. Why? So he didn't have to make a decision about that. And where you see, professional athletes and so forth having habits that they have put into place in their life, where they eat the same thing for breakfast, they exercise at the same time, they organize their life in the same time. One of the powers of habits is to reduce the number of decisions that you have to make so that you can free your conscious mental processing capacity for making better decisions. So this is a risk of working too hard, is that the quality of our thinking process goes down. And so if you're in an organization where you sometimes think, I'm not sure if I am understanding this challenge correctly, thinking about it right, I'm not sure if we as a company are making the right decisions, often that is because we're trying to scale, but we're not doing it wisely. Now, the third thing, what happens when you add more people? You hire more people. So you think, okay, well, we've got 4 admins and developers on our team right now. We want to have twice the capacity. So we should hire 4 more people. Now, this again, I'll hat tip to Troy McGinnis at who put his math at Observable HQ. Let's say you've got 8 people. The ability of 8 people to actually work, to do the work of 8 people. Can 8 people, this is a question, can 8 people do the work of 8 people? So we would think that one person can do the work of one person. 8 people should be able to do the work of 8 people. That's true unless those 8 people have to coordinate with each other in any way. If those people are totally parallel, if 8 people are working on utterly independent, unrelated things, then yeah, they can do the work of 8 people. But as soon as they have to coordinate with each other, you have, this is called Amdahl's law. It's another law. All of these things are decades old. Mathematically, they've been proven that it just doesn't work. You're not actually getting the capacity and the throughput of 8 people from 8 people. If only 80% of your work is parallelizable, quite a word, parallelizable, meaning like 4 days of the week, you can work independently, but then 1 day of the week, you've got to integrate your work and deploy it together and so forth. You're actually only getting 3.3 times the effectiveness, and basically the equivalent of 3.3 people. That 1 day a week of coordination drops the ability of those 8 people to work independently so much that you're really only getting the output of 3.3 people. Now look at this. If I ramp the numbers up to 25 people, okay, clearly 8 people were not doing it. So let's triple that team. Let's get 25 people. If those 25 people still have to coordinate their work, they're basically doing the work of 4.3 people. And this is where you get insane situations where you've got tons of Salesforce developers and admins and so forth. But because they have to coordinate around the pipeline, they're working on the same kinds of issues, the same kind of metadata at the same time. You know, Ben and I both want to change the same page layout. Well, that's a coordination problem. We both need to deploy, and we only have a deployment going once every week or once every 2 weeks. That's a coordination problem, right? We need to send all the work to the testing at a certain period, a certain time, so it can all be tested together. That's a coordination problem. So as soon as you get these points of coordination in your process, you dramatically reduce the productivity of your team in shocking ways. So I want to talk about redefining quality, having level set on that, and hopefully maybe, and I'd love to hear, in the Q&A or the chat, if we've got the chat activated, if any of you can recognize any of these situations. Does anybody see anything similar to these things in your own workplace? You can anonymize, and we won't call out your name or your company, but love to hear in the chat if anybody encounters similar things where there's like a traffic jam. And all of this is equivalent to being in a traffic jam where you've got, 8 cars in parallel, but if they all have to get through one narrow lane, they have to go one at a time, and it slows everything down. So in the meantime, I want to get into redefining quality. And so seeing, yeah, so I'm definitely seeing some chat messages here. So thanks for that. So I want to get into redefining quality and helping us to understand a little bit more what this means. So the reason we try to scale like that is because we're trying to be efficient. We're trying to do more with less. And that's what efficiency is about, do more with less. But really, there's 2 kinds of efficiency. There's what's called resource efficiency, and there's flow efficiency. And resource efficiency means for every resource that you have, say a person, whatever, keep that resource maximally used, keep that person maximally busy, for example. Now, there's a different kind of efficiency, which is called flow efficiency. And the idea with flow efficiency is you want to maximize the end-to-end flow of value. So it doesn't matter whether everybody's staying busy or not. What matters is how much the team is producing overall. And there's an analogy in sports that I think this is one of the themes that came out in Moneyball, if you've seen the movie Moneyball or done any of that analysis. The goal of sports metrics are not to figure out who are the best individual players. You have a team with the best individual players. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the winningest team out there. The goal of the team is to win games, and winning games requires that everybody work together. And eventually you want to win this, win the series, win the season. And that requires the team working together effectively, consistently, game after game, season after season. And that's more what we talk about when we talk about flow efficiency. So just to depict a little bit, resource efficiency is like everybody just maximally, staying busy all the time. But flow efficiency is, what is the flow? What is the net overall flow? Each of these cars, can move in parallel, but in practice, if you reduce the traffic down to a one-lane road, everybody just slows right the heck down. Not because it doesn't matter if you're in a Ferrari or a Ford Pinto, right? Everybody is moving at the same speed when you get into traffic, and that's why most of the money spent on sports cars is completely wasted, I would say, by the way, if you want to save money. So efficiency for whom is another question we need to ask. So if we're talking about efficiency, then we think efficiency for whom? So resource efficiency focuses on the company itself. Is the company getting its money's worth out of each of the employees, each of the servers, all the things that it's paid for? That's quite important. It's quite important that companies not be spending more money than they have to, or that any of us, we shouldn't be spending more money than we have to. But we need to think a little bit more intelligently about this, because resource efficiency is very much an inward-looking metric, whereas flow efficiency is centered on the recipient's needs. And I've got this nice sort of warm, fuzzy picture about a delivery happening, right? And we think about logistics companies, Amazon and other companies that have optimized around how do you deliver quickly. So rapid delivery is a challenge that humanity has been grappling with for centuries, in a sense, but especially the last few decades, trying to figure out how to get all of these things moving as efficiently as possible. Now, all logistics companies, if they're still in business, they have learned how to optimize around flow efficiency. And that's why you get things like Amazon Prime, where he's just trying to figure out how to shorten the delivery time. The only way you can shorten delivery time like that is getting the whole company to reorient around this flow efficiency, reorient around delivering value to customers. So all of this is summarized in a book called This is Lean. It's a book actually translated from a Swedish original, but it's a very simple book, short book, talking about resolving the efficiency paradox, that there is this kind of paradox about efficiency, that if you just focus on resource efficiency, it actually increases the total amount of work that everybody has to do, leads to long delays, large batches, many failures, and so forth. Whereas flow efficiency, the focus is on moving a single piece of work through the pipeline. The focus is on prioritizing, meeting the customer needs. And essentially, this establishes the upper limit on process efficiency. So process efficiency, basically the maximum efficiency you could possibly have is defined by the flow efficiency. So if everything was just, if you take this idea of what would it take to move a single piece of work through the pipeline? And when we say pipeline, you get a new request, modification to trigger, bug fix, page layout change, new flow, something like that. What is the shortest time that it could possibly take you to deliver that to production? Now, obviously, the very shortest time is to do it directly in production, but that's risky. So you make that flow and you do it in development, right? What's the shortest time that you could move it from development to production, but including checking that you didn't break anything else? You need a testing environment of some kind, right? You need to take the time to do the appropriate tests. But even if you do your work in a development environment, you do all the appropriate tests, what is the absolute shortest time that it would take you to build the flow and to deliver the flow to production, running through all the tests? That is your flow efficiency. And that is what you should be striving to achieve for lots of reasons, not least of which is that there's somebody who's waiting for that flow to be delivered. There's somebody who's waiting, and I know, it's confusing here because I'm using flow in two different senses. I just realized that I'm talking about the flow of work which is any kind of work, triggers, page layouts, whatever. And I did make a reference to Salesforce flows, but let me stop talking about Salesforce flows so I don't make you any more confused. So how quickly could you create a trigger, move that trigger through to production? That's the question. Now, another great metaphor, and I'm speaking in metaphors here, speaking in analogies here, just to help us to understand, because otherwise, we get very confused. I think it's shocking the degree to which computer people get profoundly and fundamentally confused about what it is that we're doing, what it is that we are supposed to be doing. Because a lot of stuff happens in the computer world that just would be unacceptable in a restaurant. That we only deploy, once every month, once every 2 weeks, something like that. A lot of these things, they just don't work in the world. They just don't meet current expectations in terms of how often should food be delivered to a restaurant, say, or how often, how quickly can you deliver packages and so forth. We batch things up into these big batches because it's the best way for us. We figured out how to do things, but it's still relatively inefficient compared to a lot of things in the real world. So taking this relay race analogy, what's a relay race? Somebody's running as fast as they can, they take the baton, they hand it to the next person, and that person ideally starts running alongside them for a little bit, gets the baton, and then runs the next leg and so forth. Now, a relay race is interesting because it's not just a race, it's a coordination problem. You've got to get each of these different runners coordinated with each other. And that's a pretty good analogy for what we're dealing with in the business world, where you've got lots of people and they're having to coordinate their activities together. And this coordination problem is quite tricky. So to go back to the illustration of developing a trigger in your development environment, maybe have a business analyst, product owner, somebody's getting the specifications. They're doing the first part from the end users. They're doing the first part of the relay race. They pass to the developers building the trigger. Second part of the relay race. They pass to, ideally, maybe they do the deployment themselves to a testing environment, or maybe there's a release manager who somehow gets involved. Next part of the relay race goes to the testing environment. Testers take over. That's the next part of the relay race. Now, the most efficient relay race is you're passing one baton, just one thing from one person to another, to another, to another. But we typically work in large batches. It's a little bit more like having a dump truck where we come and, fill the dump truck up with requirements from customers or requests from customers, and we dump them on the developer, and the developers then gradually shoveling stuff from the dump truck from one pile to the next pile. And then they've got another, dump truck worth of stuff that is piled up at the end of the developers, and that gets moved in big batches over to the testers and so forth. And you can see that this large batch approach to doing work, like you take a lot of requirements all at the same time, you work on a lot of things in parallel as a developer, then you test all the things in parallel. It's got some benefit because if you're a developer, you get all the stuff at one time, but you're not actually getting your work out to the end users. And so you can be a developer working on the trigger, but if it's going to be another, few days, weeks, who knows, months before it's actually used by the end users, how do you know that you built it correctly? That's the question. So if it takes you days, weeks, months to get your work to end users and get feedback on it, how do you know that you built it correctly? How do you know that you built what they really need? You don't have a feedback loop. If you can't talk to the end users, then you can't actually address the errors immediately. They then go in the system, and maybe at some point somebody submits a bug ticket. By the time somebody submitted a bug ticket, for every one bug ticket, there's been 100 complaints. Yeah, I'm just making that number up, but I'm going to guess. How many things do you complain about in your life? And how many times do you actually submit feedback to a company that did something inappropriately? It's only a small number of times that you actually give the feedback to a company. So feedback really is a gift. But we need to understand there's a ton of quality issues that we're often inflicting on the end users because we're taking this large batch approach. And that takes us to lean, and all of these are concepts that are central to lean. But DevOps, everybody used this title DevOps. I came out with this book, Mastering Salesforce DevOps, 4 years ago. Nobody was using the term DevOps 5 years ago, let's say, in the Salesforce world, or it was extraordinarily rare. But how many people actually understand DevOps? If you don't understand lean, then I would say you don't understand DevOps. It doesn't matter if your title says DevOps engineer, if that's what you do all day, every day. If you don't understand lean, you don't understand DevOps. If you don't understand these concepts, you don't actually understand DevOps. All you've done is you've rebranded what used to be called Salesforce Release Management. You just called it DevOps. It's a fun word. It's a nice word, got a nice ring to it. You put it on LinkedIn that I'm now a DevOps engineer instead of, I used to be a release manager. Now I'm a DevOps engineer. Maybe you get a raise, but have we actually understood how to do our work in a more effective way? We need to understand these lean principles. And fundamentally, there's 5 principles of lean. So if you want to understand lean, you need to understand these 5 things. And notice that these are a cycle. And the first one at the top, specify customer value, which means you need to figure out what the end customers actually value. If you're asked to build a trigger, what is it that people really want? And if you as a developer don't really know why you're building it, if you don't really know what people value and what they want, you're not going to be able to build the right thing. The second is identify the value stream. The value stream is the relay race in this analysis. It's the sequence of activities that are involved in delivering value, but it's called a value stream because ideally that value is just going to be flowing, right? You get a request, you fulfill the request as quickly as possible. So most teams try to move towards, there's this been discussion for 20 years about moving from waterfall to agile. But typically when teams talk about agile, they're talking about Scrum, where you do sprints and daily stand-ups and user stories and so forth. And that's a lot better than just deploying once every 6 months or something like that. But it's hardly a stream, right? It's hardly flow. So Scrum is just an intermediate step on the way to something more like Kanban or single piece flow. Now, that's the goal, this third step, making the value creating steps flow. So move more and more and more towards that relay race kind of effect. So when the request comes in, hey, there's a miscalculation. As soon as we become aware that there was a miscalculation someplace, how quickly can we correct the calculation and roll that out to production? That is making value flow. Having a miscalculation, negative value. Having the correct calculations, that's positive value. You want to make those value creating steps flow. And it needs to be, this is a key aspect of lean, it needs to be at the pull of the customer, which means that you're not building things hoping that people will use them. You're building things based on what people are actually using, which in a sense means that you're building, in a sense means your end goal is for people to use your stuff. And so where you see these projects where a consulting company is paid $1 million to build a bunch of Salesforce stuff and they roll it out, but then people don't actually use it, or they don't use it very much, or they don't like it, you're getting poor adoption in Salesforce. That's because you didn't build based on flow. You just built a bunch of stuff that a few people thought was needed. You pushed it out to people. Instead of designing it in such a way that they were pulling that value. And then the fifth aspect, you're striving for perfection. And that's where you get this idea of continuous improvement. And this is a cycle where you're constantly going back around and around and around to perfect each of these. So when you're striving for perfection, you're finding your understanding of what customers actually value. By customers, we can say the end users. Most Salesforce development is for internal users. You're perfecting the value stream, removing any unnecessary steps and so forth. You're perfecting the flow of work. You're perfecting your ability to respond to pull to requests by the customers and so forth, this iterative process. Really, what you're doing is you're trying to expedite time to value. You're trying to reduce the amount of time it takes to deliver that value. And, I've got this silly little GIF here just showing, boxes going through a manufacturing process, but everybody can understand this manufacturing analogy. If manufacturing plants work the way our Salesforce development teams worked, nobody would be getting their stuff, right? It would be a very sad Christmas. So logistics companies, manufacturing companies, restaurants, healthcare, all of these companies have moved towards lean over the years. Software development, partly because software developers don't usually read history or study other disciplines. Software actually is a bit behind in, ironically, as fast a discipline as this is. Ironically, the way to speed up as an industry, as a field of Salesforce development, is for us to slow down and to do some real good quality thinking about what we're actually doing. So reducing the amount of time it takes to deliver something is one of the most useful things you can do to improve customer experience. Both people get it sooner, but also you can get the feedback more quickly. And so as long as we really, truly orient around customer experience or user experience, that's where you get the highest quality. So you're focusing on the product that you're delivering to people, and all of this is leading into delivering a high quality product that actually meets the needs of the end users, and to do it as efficiently as possible. So this is some brief summary of Lean. Now, taking this back to the software development process, you can see that in all of the stages of the software delivery process, this is a diagram that we like to use at AutoRABIT to illustrate what we're trying to do. Is this, in the DevOps world, these are called the 3 ways. The flow from development to integration to testing to production. The feedback is the loop. And then this loop here implies the loop of continuous learning, continuous improvement. And so you're wanting, as you're doing development, to move work into integration as quickly as possible and get feedback. If there's merge conflicts, if there's any issues, to improve the learning, to move it then into testing as quickly as possible, to get feedback on that if there's any issues. And to do this inner loop is the learning loop. That's the loop where everybody is constantly refining. What will it take for me to do work where I'm not encountering merge conflicts as frequently? I was talking to somebody yesterday at this DevOps conference, and he was saying that we didn't used to have to deal with merge conflicts. We didn't used to use version control, and we never used to have merge conflicts. Now that we're using version control, we have a lot of merge conflicts. And so the developers complain that now that we've got merge conflicts. It's interesting, right? You only get merge conflicts if you're using version control. Seems like version control is introducing a new kind of pain, a new kind of problem of merge conflicts. What's actually happening is if you don't have version control, you don't have merge conflicts, you just overwrite each other's work. If there's no version control, if you just use change sets, you're just overwriting each other's work all the time, but nobody notices. Nobody notices that you're overwriting something that somebody else did. Nobody notices if there's a conflict. You only start to notice when you have version control in place. So merge conflicts are actually great. They're fantastic. They're a sign that's indicating that there's a problem in the integration process. And the problem is that you either didn't parallelize your work. Again, there's that word, parallelization. You didn't really parallelize the work. Ben and I were both trying to work on a page layout at the same time. Whoops. Need to do a better job of parallelizing the work. Make sure that I'm never working on the same thing he's working on. Or if we are, you find out as quickly as possible in a matter of minutes or hours instead of days or weeks. So hopefully this gives you some sense for how this fits together. But I'd love to just open it up now to questions and to hearing from you all. What's on your minds?
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. A lot of that I've never heard spoken about in the Salesforce ecosystem before, so it's super interesting for me, and looks like everyone else as well. So thank you very much for your time. A few shout outs as well. The book that you were suggesting was groundbreaking, Andrew. So your book, I believe. So that's great. And This Is Lean is a great book as well. So yeah, check out those. And we've got a few questions to kick us off, but if you've got any more, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll try and get to as many as we can. There is one here, Andrew. You might want to get up the Q&A box just because it is quite long, but I'll just read it out. In my previous project, we had 6 squads with at least 3 developers, and there's a situation of collaboration between squads as they work on dependent components. We had a monthly release, and during the UAT phase, often some squads decide not to go to prod because it always causes a mess. Okay, not so much of a question, but interesting to hear from someone, how they struggle with the collaboration side of things.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess just briefly lingering on that, so 6 squads, each of them has at least 3 developers, right? And so in theory, when the management team looks at the team, all they see are 6 squads. They see 6 independent squads. They don't see any interdependency between those squads. So 6 squads should be able to do the work of 6 squads. With 3 developers each, right, should be able to do the work of 18 developers, right? No problem. But as soon as you hit overlaps between those squads, right? Now the overlaps, the conflicts, the parallelization, right? Where there's 2 teams trying to change the same thing at the same time, that's hidden. Management doesn't see that. You only see that when you look at the code layer, right? And Salesforce is I mean, it's a disaster, a huge mess when it comes to parallelizing work, right? Because it's all one big database. So every Salesforce org is one big database. So unless you've actually done something to try to modularize that org, you're going to have these conflicts all the time. And so there need to be clear lines of demarcation, right? This team only works on this metadata. This other team only works on that metadata, and clear separation. And where there's shared metadata, things like the 6 big sources of conflict, accounts, contacts, leads, users, opportunities, and so forth, these shared objects, they can be managed by a platform team. So this is the kind of structuring and architecting of the teams that needs to be done in advance, and there need to be real clear lines of demarcation so you can actually operate in parallel, because Salesforce is not going to help you to do that, right? You've got to do the work. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So this is quite a nice question to kick us off. How much manual effort, as in building and migrating, is saved by leveraging DevOps in Salesforce, not counting the DevOps setup time?
Great, and great question. So the DevOps setup time, as you say, that's kind of a one-time cost. You need to select a tool like AutoRABIT, you need to get that, the team trained and so forth. There are some one-time costs. Typically, the thing that people really struggle with is deployments. That's the first thing that you can automate, making sure that you can automate the deployment from between each of the environments. And so whatever amount of time teams are currently spending doing deployments manually, or you've got somebody on the team who's just allocated to deploy things from one environment to another, that's manual time that will typically be reduced by introducing automated deployments. But there's actually a ton of other manual work that is addressed by DevOps, but it's often hidden. For example, the work of trying to figure out why a bit of code is the way it is. If you have no version control, you have no idea how that code got there. You have no indication of when it was changed, who's changing things, and so forth. So operating without version control is utterly insane. Nobody in this modern world, if you've got more than 3 or 4 developers or admins working on a Salesforce org, you have to be using version control, at least doing daily snapshots, right? Otherwise, you have no idea who's changing the org. It's a security violation. There's laws you may be breaking, but it's certainly you waste a ton of time just trying to figure out what's going on in each. So this DevOps process is a journey, right? Because you put version control in place, you put automated deployments in place, begins to address some issues. Then it can raise other issues. Like all of a sudden you start discovering these merge conflicts, and then you realize you need to parallelize your teams and so forth. But basically, the more pressure you're under to scale, the more you need to scale in a smart way by taking some of these DevOps approaches. That's a short answer. Ish.
Great, thank you. And then in terms of parallelization, what tactics and tools do you use to ensure this takes place?
In terms of parallelization, what tactics or tools do you use? Salesforce doesn't make it easy. And there was a big push with Salesforce DX to introduce unlocked packages as a path to modularization. But unlocked packages require some degree of sophistication from the development team. And so it often felt a bit daunting where we have teams that are not familiar with, some of the principles of traditional software development, right? So everybody's gotten stuck. I would say your best tool for modularization is, wait for it, folders. Now in 2023, I shouldn't have to be advocating the benefit of dividing your files into folders. But if you are not using the Salesforce DX source format, and if you're not actually subdividing your source format repo into subfolders, you have no clarity whatsoever about which bits go with which. You've got a trigger, you've got an object, you've got flows, you've got, whatever validation rules, all this stuff. And somebody somewhere could figure out that they're related, but there's no clear indication in your folder structure that these things go together. So you have to be using source format, I would say, and then dividing your metadata into subfolders. Under that Force App main default folder, you can subdivide it into subfolders, even without doing packaging. And that is, one of the easiest, most powerful things you can do.
Great. And a couple of really interesting questions here, but just a kind of one on Salesforce DevOps more generally. What is the typical makeup of a small, medium, and large Salesforce initiative? Well, actually, maybe just the second part of the question. At what point do you introduce DevOps into Salesforce? For example, DevOps with a team of 2 could possibly be overkill.
Yeah. So I started as a Salesforce developer. Like my background was just trying to make sense of my own work. And after I figured out that, you could and should use version control, no matter, even if I was a developer of 1, a team of 1, I always use version control, even if I'm the only person on the team who's using version control, just so I can know what I did. Like, you make a few changes and then you get it working, but then you need to make a few more changes to get the next bit working. How do you save your state? How do you save that place, right? How do you get back to, that place where it was working? So if you're actually writing, certainly if you're actually writing code, even as a team of 1, you should be using version control. If you're just a team of 2, that's perfect. That's ideal, because it's relatively easy to convince the rest of the team, because there's only one person, or you convince the manager to convince the rest of the team to use version control. So you're never too small to be using version control and automating deployments. Now, if you're under a ton of pressure and you're just barely learning how Salesforce works and so forth, maybe it's not the very first thing you do, right? But as soon as you start noticing that you're losing work, that you're overwriting each other's stuff, that it's taking more time to do deployments, then it feels like it should. When you're spending time trying to figure out who changed what, why, when, where, how did this problem arise, strange bugs are arising, all of those are signs that you need to be using DevOps tools. Now, you'd ask quickly about small, medium, large teams. Small team of 1 person does everything. Team of 2, they divide it up roughly. And, I would say a small team is still something less than like 6 or 8 people. It's still one team. So when you get medium, that's where you start to get more than 6 or 8 people. You start to split into 2 teams, 3 teams. One of them does the CPQ, one of them does, something else, support processes and so forth. Then you start getting these parallelization issues, because there are these common objects, accounts and opportunities and so forth. And that's where, when you start getting to a large team, that's where it just becomes a complete disaster, a complete mess. Because typically, unless you've built good habits as a small and medium team, then large teams really don't know how to coordinate well. But you've got project managers, but you don't often have what you really need, which is a platform team, which is a group of people who are just working on the shared components and then highly parallel, get the other squads, so to speak. Maybe if you have 6 squads, like the previous question said, one of them is the platform squad that deals with the shared stuff, and the other 5 squads aim to be as independent as they possibly can, so that they know the consequence of changing their stuff. So,
thanks, Andrew. One more question left here in the Q&A. So if you do have any more, we do have a few more minutes, so feel free to put them in the chat. One from Frederick here. So how do you manage parallel projects with one pipeline when they all want to move to shared environments like SIT and UAT at different times? We're trying to enforce a release calendar, but it never benefits every project's needed. Any advice?
Right. And that is extremely common and typical, that teams try to use a release calendar to coordinate these parallel teams, these 6 squads. I'm just going to keep using that analogy, right? Well, we think, okay, these 6 squads should be doing the work of 6 squads. One of them wants us to release every week. One of them needs to release every month. They have different timelines and so forth. Theoretically, it seems like they should be able to operate independently. But because Salesforce is one big monolithic database, that forces this coordination. It forces teams to not actually be able to work in parallel. And so teams try to do the best they can by trying to solve this at the level of planning, at the level of calendars. The reason we try to solve this with calendars is because it's a project manager that's trying to solve it. And a project manager doesn't understand the architecture. The only thing the project manager understands are calendars and resources. So the project manager is using the only tool they know, which are calendars, to try to solve the problem. But this needs to be solved at a software architecture level, by having teams that are actually independent. So it's theoretically not a problem if you have 6 squads all going to the same SIT, UAT production environment, as long as they're not touching the same functionality, as long as there's no overlap between the functionality. Salesforce does allow you to only do one deployment at a time, but that's not usually where teams get blocked up. It can be if you've got a really big team or a ton of tests, something like that. But typically, teams get blocked up not because they're waiting for another team's deployment to complete to SIT. They get blocked up because when they deployed their stuff to SIT, it broke the other team's stuff. That's what causes the conflict. And that's because you haven't parallelized things at the level of architecture. And that's something that only the software architects and software developers can fix, because it's at a level that only they are seeing. So
nice. Great. Thank you. And another one here to round us off quite nicely. So how do we best convey to management that just adding people alone won't improve the flow?
Yeah. They need to respect your expertise in your technical domain. You don't tell the accounting department how to do accounting, right? We don't tell the marketing department how to do marketing. Other teams need to respect that engineering needs an autonomy to figure out the best way to do their job. There's certain things you do in the accounting department, right? Like, double checking all of the finances and going through approvals for all of the expenses and so forth, because that's the way things are done. And so we as an engineering team need to have the confidence and the clarity to say, that, for example, there's one of the, I think he was a CTO of Amazon, said, or no, maybe not a CTO, but higher up, a guy in Amazon said, we allocate about 50% of our efforts to behind the scenes work, either DevOps, tooling improvements, platform improvements, and so forth, and 50% of our effort to like new feature development, something like that. So if even the world's best software development teams are allocating maybe only 50% of their capacity to feature development, then what should we be doing, right? We need to be training. We need to be investing time in training, updating, the software, quality checks, building automated tests, building deployments, these kinds of things. It'll pay off in the long run. What's really not going to pay off is employing 25 people and getting the efficiency of 4.4 people, right? That doesn't pay off. That's bad economics. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And another one that's coming from Rob, just in case you have any additional insights, but on a very similar vein, it's difficult convincing upper management, especially when they see the initial setup, which takes away from delivering incremental business value. So any hints to convince or persuade management?
So this is, I was answering some of that in my previous answer as well, but basically there is, it's a matter of trust. And trust is built of two main components, character and competence. So does upper management trust our character? Do they trust our intention? Do they trust that we legitimately, genuinely care about the users in their departments and we want them to be maximally effective? The only reason they should trust us is if we actually do care, right? So that's the first thing. Check, do I actually care about the end users? Do I care about the same things that management cares about? So if we need to learn to care if we don't already care, right? And then we'll be trustworthy and then they'll trust us. The other is competence. Are we doing a good job? And then when we make a commitment, can we carry out that commitment? Are we able to fulfill the, the promises that we had made? And that's a very hard job, right? And it's certainly to be able to estimate how much capacity we have. And that's some of the pressure that we're under, is to try to continually increase our competence. And so I can't help on this webinar improve our character, right? That's our job, is to care more deeply about what the company is doing and the end users, right? But when it comes to competence, that's where gradually getting these small wins, like we start using version control and now we have fewer issues, these kinds, as we gradually make progress with these, we'll win the confidence of upper management, and then they'll let us take, bigger steps to accomplish our goals. So it's a great question to end on. So I'm, really delighted to have had a chance to spend time with the group here, and stay in touch. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, and the recording will be available from AutoRABIT's website, and I'd love to continue the conversation with anybody here. So Ben, thanks as always for inviting me.
Yeah, no worries. It was an absolute pleasure. Really nice to listen to you as always, Andrew. And thank you so much for everyone for attending today. As Andrew said, this will be on AutoRABIT's website, and I think it'll be sent around as well. So thank you very much for spending an hour with us, and we hope to see you on the next webinar. See you all soon.